Now that we've looked at the verbal morphology of American Sign Language, we can turn to its adjectival morphology. Adjectives, you'll remember, are descriptive words. Just as ASL verbs can be modified in a number of ways, so too can adjectives be modified. We will look at the movement inflections that can accompany ASL adjectives, as well as the facial inflections that can accompany these adjectives. Movement inflections begin with the concept of intensity. We can take a normal adjective, like the adjective pretty, and add the intensity inflection, which changes pretty to very pretty. The way this is done is the initial hold of the sign is slightly extended and then released in a more quick fashion. Similarly, you can take the sign old and change it to very old, or even the sign slow and change it to very slow. Just as verbs can be modified to show repetition, so too can adjectives. So we can take the adjective that means sick and use the repetitive motion to mean sick again and again. The same with continuation. The circular movement can be used to show sick for a long time, or in this case it would be sickly. Facial expressions can also accompany various ASL adjectives. Remember, not every inflection can accompany every adjective, so be careful and try out some. Ask your instructor as well as native ASL signers just to make sure that you're correctly pairing inflections with adjectives. But in general, we have a few categories. The first set of facial expressions relate to size. Now notice, these facial expressions are used with signs that already have to do with size. You can't simply sign book while you make the facial expression that means large and change the word book into big book. That doesn't work that way. You can't sign car while making a facial expression that means small and turn the meaning of the word into little car. That's not right. You can take a sign that already shows size, like a size and shape specifier, or like a sign that relates to size, like the sign big or tall, and add one of these inflections, and that will then change the meaning. The first is the pooh, P-O-O-H, pooh inflection, and that means very small. So you could use this classifier to talk about a house that's very small, or you could talk about perhaps a lump of something that's very small. Similarly, the OO is used to show things that are very small, very thin, or even very flat. So you could use the sign skinny with that modification to mean very skinny. MM means normal or regular. So you could take the sign that would normally mean tall and add that, and it would mean sort of tall. Or a sign that means big with that would mean sort of big. Finally, cha is used to illustrate something that's huge. So you could take the sign big and add cha, which would then turn that into give that the meaning of huge. A few possible facial expressions show the idea of intensity. The tense face, signed in this way, can be used to show that something is more intense than expected. So for example, if you wanted to say something's really fast, or to show that something is really hard, then that tensed face is one way to do it. The MM face, as we've already discussed, means sort of, not very intense. So something's sort of difficult, or sort of slow. The bared teeth illustrate that something is very intense. So if you want to say something is very hard or very fast, then the bared teeth do that. And then finally, sao indicate the highest level of intensity. It's difficult to express this in English, as oftentimes in English we simply revert to sort of a curse word to show this idea. So you could say, if you wanted to say something was cold, but then in English we might say something that, with a curse word to sort of say it was really, really cold. Or if you wanted to say something was pretty, then that would mean something was really, really pretty. And then there are at least two ways to show distance. You have a sign like far. You can add the idea with ah or la la, and those mouth movements indicate that something is very far. So similarly, the cheek to shoulder movement, where the one side of the face and the shoulder are raised together, indicate that something is close. Or this can be in space, like very near, or it can be in time, very recently, or if you wanted to say something was very soon. These facial expressions, again, only get you started. They're not an exhaustive list of all the possible facial inflections that can modify the meaning of adjectives. It's also worth noting the syntax of adjectives. I know we haven't formally gotten to that part of the course, but adjectives can come before or after nouns in American Sign Language. When they're used in a way that's less emphatic, then they become before nouns, like adjectives usually come in English. So you could say it was a nice car, a pretty car, a fast car. But whenever they're emphasized, and oftentimes when you're using some of these modifications, they are emphasized, then they tend to come after the noun. So if you say you want a car that's very fast, then you would probably sign car and then fast with the adjective afterward. So be ready to expect adjectives both before and after nouns, as they do occur in both places.